Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Geopolitical Forum. I know it's tumultuous out there. I hear there's a big demonstration, no king demonstration in Grand Park somewhere. So I'm glad you guys made it. And Jenny wasn't able to make it physically, but she's with us on Zoom, so it's great. Welcome, everyone. This is a Geopolitical Forum. The tagline is "The World on Its Own Terms." I'm Eric Mao, the founding partner of the forum. And with the forum, the inception was, we started the forum 3 years ago, 2023 in April. I remember our first event was discussion, the topic of is Ukraine war a world war? Right? That was about 1 year into that war, and now it's still going on in 2026. And so historically as well as contemporarily, Russia's neighbors do not feel safe. But at the same time, Russia doesn't feel safe, right? Historically and contemporarily, right? So at the other side of the earth, around the United States, in the Western Hemisphere, United States neighbors have had some tough time, right? Especially nowadays with the Monroe Doctrine. It's kind of taken to a different level, although it's a different world. You know, if you ask Denmark or Greenland, do you feel safe, right? If you ask Mexico, do you feel safe? Canada, do you feel safe? Panama, do you feel safe? With their jewel of Panama Canal. Not to mention the Venezuela, what happened to them in January. Do you feel safe still, right? The answer, the rational answer is probably negative. So we put these two worlds together. You can see that they have been on the posture of containing each other, also looking at each other as expansionary. You know, I don't have to remind you of the Cold War. And also after the Cold War, still in that same posture, only on a lesser extent, until Russia 2022, February 24th, 2022, they launched their not full scale in the beginning, but that's a real invasion into Ukraine. And then the heat rose again. Until again, this Trump administration, especially toward the end of last year, this year, he ramped up the peace process, the negotiation. And it seems like he wanted to mediate between two sides, between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, so that you have a reasonable peace, like end the war, and so that U.S. can free up the resources in Europe, in NATO, in the battlefield. To do what? To do what? Well, some may see is to contain China, so they can pivot to containing China. You know, the containing only means with you contain the other side will try to contain back. And that will admonish that if you seek your security, you can't have your own security at the expense of security of others. I think that's the situation we're here right now. You try to do another containment of China, so you free up the resources in Europe. What you gonna get at the end of the day, right? So the whole thing is just like endless containment and strategy, muscle flexing, and on and on and on. So we here, that's what we're here to talk about, from containment to convergence, U.S. security policy toward Russia. I'm very excited and great pleasure of me to have Ambassador Kelly here to lead a discussion, to explain things for us, to share his views. Ambassador I.Kelly is a former statesman and foreign service officer who has spent the majority of his career representing the United States in Southern and Eastern Europe. He served as a U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, from 2010 to 2013, and as U.S. ambassador to Georgia from 2015 to 2018. Prior to ambassadorships, Professor Kelly directed the Office of Russian Affairs in Washington, D.C. and spent 20 years in a variety of influential foreign service positions that took him to Italy, Turkey, and former Yugoslavia, and the former Soviet Union, where he played a key role in post-Cold War transitions. So the situation here in Europe, we can ask Ambassador Kelly to explain to us what he did back then and today's the impact that we are living through. Professor Kelly holds a doctorate in Slavic languages and literature from Columbia University. Since April 2018, he has been ambassador in residence at Northwestern University, where he teaches international studies and Slavic languages and literature. So today's agenda, we will have Ambassador Kelly to make a presentation, about 15 to 20 minutes. Then we open to the audience for statements, opinions, rebuttal, questions, answers, and as well as on the folks on Zoom. So without further ado, Ambassador Kelly.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. And as Eric says, I'd like to make kind of a formal, semi-formal presentation for about 15 minutes, kind of looking at U.S.-Russian relations from 1945 to the present, in terms of what the overall security policy was. That's why the title of it is From Containment to Convergence, and well, convergence in the sense that instead of trying to provide a counter model to Moscow, our foreign policy is starting to converge with Moscow's foreign policy. So I'll start with my semi-formal presentation. After World War II, European countries on the western side of the Iron Curtain were in ruins, weak and vulnerable to Soviet expansion. Soviet diplomats and spies worked to undermine trust in the U.S. Motives for developing the Marshall Plan for Europe, and began to blockade all land routes to West Berlin in 1948. And this showed that the Soviets were willing to use coercive methods to expand their dominance over Eastern Europe. The U.S.'s response, a dramatic and effective airlift to ensure that Berliners did not freeze and starve, lasted nearly a year and helped prove to Europe and to Moscow that Washington was committed to protect its allies against Soviet aggression. In 1949, the U.S., Canada, and several Western European nations decided to create a single security space among the democratic nations in North America and Europe. And of course, as you probably know, the bedrock of this alliance is Article 5 of the treaty, and that's a pledge to defend those whose territory is invaded. The old idea that an attack on one is an attack on all. So back in 48, the Soviets had resorted to coercion to attain its expansionist goal, which was the takeover of Berlin. And the U.S. and Europe responded with the policy of containment, with the NATO treaty creating this zone of one indivisible security across the North Atlantic as the main vehicle to deter Russian aggression. NATO, of course, was remarkably successful in containing the USSR and its satellites within their post-World War II borders. While the alliance was meant primarily to protect Europe from aggression, Article 5 was invoked only once, and that was in response to aggression that was not against Europe, but against the US. So on September 12th, 2001, Canada and our European allies pledged to support us after the attack by Al-Qaeda. The allies followed words with action, setting up a joint International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, for Afghanistan. All 32 NATO allies contributed to ISAF. Nearly 1,300 Canadian and European soldiers, along with 2,400 Americans, gave their lives in the wake of an attack against the American homeland. On February 12th last year, Defense Secretary Hegseth delivered what I see as a deadly blow to this American commitment to a common security space, and also signaled the end of U.S. leadership in facing common security challenges with Europe. In a meeting with allies last year in Brussels, he announced that, and I'm quoting, stark strategic realities prevent the United States from being primarily focused on Europe. And then, bowing preemptively to Russian demands, he also said that Ukrainian membership in NATO was not a realistic outcome, and ruled out U.S. involvement both in helping the Ukrainians defend their territory and in any post-conflict peacekeeping force in Ukraine. So he became the first U.S. senior official to suggest publicly that Moscow had a veto and who becomes a member of NATO. Ever since 1949, it's been the goal of the Soviet Union, or the goal of Kremlin's leaders, I should say, to sever the security link between the U.S. and Europe. And I believe that Hegseth's announcement last February was the beginning of the end of that link. The infamous 28-point Ukrainian peace plan, worked out between Steve Witkoff and Putin crony Kirill Dmitriev, without any input from Europeans, was, as former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Landsberg has put it in a bit of hyperbole, the end of the transatlantic link. So that may have been hyperbolic, but it did express Europe's loss of trust in America as a reliable ally. So let's talk a little bit about that 28-point plan. It would have required Ukraine to reduce its military force by a third, forego any cooperation with NATO, and de facto cede territory, significant territory, to Russia. And of course, such moves essentially would reward Russia for its brutal aggression. And conceding sovereignty or territory to a stronger power would mark a dangerous return to a world where might makes right. It also signals the end to this administration making common cause with Europe when it comes to working together on threats to security. Before this administration, the U.S. would routinely consult with NATO allies before releasing a plan that would affect the security of Europe. Also without precedent is the idea that Canada and the European allies were forced to issue their own counterproposal, this time presumably without U.S. input. While it seems that Secretary of State Rubio, has been able to walk back some of the more pro-Russian provisions of this plan, the damage has already been done to the once traditional transatlantic solidarity in the face of Russian aggression. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has made it clear it is withdrawing from Europe in favor of establishing dominance first in the Western Hemisphere, and now we're seeing also in Iran and the Middle East. So arguably, The Trump administration has done more in a year, accomplishing what the Kremlin's been trying to achieve for decades, and that's severing the security link between the U.S. And Europe. Ironically, while NATO, the West's multilateral security arrangement, is weakening, another one in the East is gaining strength. As former U.S. Ambassador to NATO Julianne Smith argued in a recent Foreign Affairs article, a military-industrial bloc is emerging in Eurasia, called by some CRINK, C-R-I-N-K. It includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Complicating the situation for the West, 3 of them are nuclear powers, and the 4th is aspiring to it. And of course, there are very dramatic events going on right now to try and prevent that. I think that from the perspective of the United States, what is even more disturbing is China and the U.S. Building a relationship that is an alliance in all but name, although they both call it a partnership without limits. Last year, Russia also signed a mutual defense treaty with North Korea, and Pyongyang sent troops to fight alongside Russians against Ukraine. China and Russia used the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to lend a veneer of multilateral legitimacy to their plans, and also to provide a counterweight, a Eurasian counterweight to Western institutions. And like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS group, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, tries to harness the disaffection of the global South with Western military and financial dominance. So whether we like it or not, our adversaries are forming coalitions, even as the administration leaves European allies to their own devices, because it believes in America first. The problem is, of course, as the last 10th century showed, the world won't let us stay behind our 2 big, beautiful oceans. So to sum up, and I never thought I would say this, but we have an administration in Washington whose foreign policy, far from containing Moscow, has begun to converge with it. In 2008, Russia invaded its neighbor Georgia and still occupies 20% of its territory. At that time, Russian officials claimed that their region, and it was understood that Ukraine was part of that region back in 2008, was their sphere of privileged interest, and that they occupied Georgia to prevent it from becoming a member of NATO. And in April of 2008, in their annual summit, NATO leaders declared that Georgia and Ukraine would become members of NATO, which was the trigger for the invasion of Georgia. And the same dynamic, occupying a significant part of the country to prevent it from joining the West, is operating in Ukraine. It's also operating in Moldova, too, where Russian troops occupy territory there against the will of the capital Chisinau. Like Putin, Trump believes stronger states are entitled to a sphere of influence and may rightfully coerce or even seize smaller states. Trump's belief in power-based entitlement is illustrated by his assertions that the U.S. should have a right, and you know all this, a right to retake the Panama Canal, annex Greenland, control Venezuela's oil, and dictate who runs Iran, and then perhaps soon Cuba. This also helps explain why Trump has pushed Ukraine to submit to Russia's territorial and other demands. He has repeatedly argued that Zelensky doesn't have the cards. In other words, doesn't have a chance against the greater power of Moscow. As Jim Mattis, Trump's former defense secretary, put it the other day, the U.S. has become a predatory state. I say that with great sadness. I feel for my colleagues in the Foreign Service who are still who still must advocate for this kind of foreign policy. but I also feel fortunate that I no longer have to. And I hope that was pretty clear from my presentation that I do not support this foreign policy. Thanks.
I understand we already have a question from Calvin. I'm going to leave with 2 questions. And Calvin, if you don't mind, once I ask my 2 questions, and can you repeat your questions for the Ambassador Kelly? Okay, bear with me. Okay, Ambassador. Yeah, I'll go with 2 questions, and you will lead the audience. You'll be the first question from the audience, then we'll go from there. Ambassador Kelly. So you mentioned the other alliances, or if you can call them alliances.
They're not really alliances. Yeah, they're coalitions, they're groupings.
Great. You got ahead of my question. So my question would be, obviously, do you see the difference between the alliances like NATO and those defense treaties with individual countries,
right,
and the SCO, the other one that you mentioned,
BRICS,
BRICS, and the other one that you mentioned. So also you did like an unlimited partnership. Well, this looks to me it's everything but military commitment, as opposed to Article 5 of NATO. Yeah. Can you elaborate on those differences? Because you obviously already understand my question, so why don't you elaborate more? Because Article 5, as we can see, it's not that automatic, right? You put it on agenda if there's aggression against any one of those member countries. You put it on agenda, then we talk. As opposed to, we don't even talk about it as far as like Russia and China, but looks to me Russia and North Korea is different, right? So why don't we extend on that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few issues here. If you're a strategist looking out from Washington about the emerging threats, you're going to be looking at this situation that we face now very differently than their predecessors did, before 1991, when the Soviet Union fell apart, and that was there were basically 2 big superpowers, 2 big nuclear powers, and our biggest multilateral instrument, as I said, to try and deter and contain this other superpower with a very different ideology, very different agenda. That instrument was NATO. The situation now is you have a I don't know what you want to call it, a constellation or a coalition. I think you can call it a coalition. It's not a legally binding treaty like NATO is. It doesn't have an Article 5. But here you have 3 nuclear powers with, as I said before, you had a 4th, although things are going on right now, that's going to, I think, at least push back Iran's desire to become a nuclear power as well. So this is it's a very different strategic environment. And I think that, one thing that the Iran conflict has really brought out is we do not have the same set of tools, or we're unwilling to build the consensus to use our natural allies in NATO, because we want to be able to act without constraints at all. The president said he wanted to make sure that their attack was a surprise. Of course, there was no way it could be a surprise with all the buildup going on over weeks anyway. But if I were a defense planner in the Pentagon right now, I would definitely be concerned about about how things are going right now with Iran. One of the real And I did spend 3 years at NATO, so I got to know NATO pretty well. This was 2004 to 2007, so it was just right after the invasion of Iraq. One of its real strengths is it's not that everybody just builds all the, spends all their money on their own military and then we kind of get together and pool our resources. It's not that way. There is a lot of coordination. For example, for mine sweeping, that is not our forte. We only have a couple of vessels that can do mine sweeping. The Brits and the European nations have a really good mine sweeping operation. And that's one of the reasons why, when Trump saw that the Strait of Hormuz was going to be closing it was going to be their response, and he asked, how can we, clear this so shipping can get through? They would say, well, the best people who have mine sweeping is Europe. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, I'm pretty sure that's one reason that he said that he wanted the Europeans to come in and help. This was after insulting them, calling them cowards, and not consulting with them, and it's not a way to win friends and influence people. Anyway, so that's a long answer.
So in terms of Article 5,
yeah,
is that activated, Article 5? So Trump is calling for the allies within NATO to join the fight, or particularly to opening up Hormuz? Is that part of Article 5?
No, it's not part of Article 5. I mean, Article 5 says an attack on the sovereign territory of an ally should be considered an attack on all. Iran, although apparently they lobbed something towards Turkey, they have not attacked NATO. So Article 5 does not apply. And that's, one reason why Putin has been very careful too, not to target. There's lots of clandestine dirty business going on in Poland and the Baltic states, but he has not, had a missile launch or something like that against the NATO ally. So, yeah, Article 5 does not apply here.
Okay. Now I changed my mind. I only have one question. Let's go to Kelvin. Could you repeat your question about Jared Kushner, his $200 million, that sort of thing? So why don't you lead the audience with your question?
Well, Calvin, just in a couple of words, I wish I knew, because as you say, the goals and the reason for the war seems to change by the day, and that's one of the real challenges, I think, of. I think again, just to just put it in just a couple of words or even one word, I think it did have an influence. And the reason I think it has an influence is because the people who have influence on Trump are his family members, like Jared Kushner, cronies, real estate cronies like Steve Witkoff. This president, in a real, I think, in a way which is very much a departure from previous post-World War II presidents, is not relying on a foreign policy process that would include, first of all, some sort of interagency process, which would be, I don't want to get too bureaucratic here, but the National Security Council for the past 70 years has been the leader of a process that would bring in all the stakeholders in the U.S., Defense Department, CIA, State Department, et cetera, and there would be a tasking out of what the pros and cons of attacking Iran would be, what are the possible consequences of it. Ambassadors in NATO states would be called upon to deliver what we call a démarche. I'm not sure why it's called a démarche. I don't know French that well. But basically going in and briefing them on what the threats were and what the challenges are and what we possibly might need from our allies. I was in Rome, Italy in 2003 when we démarched them about what Italy could do to help us take out Saddam Hussein. And it leaked out that we had approached the Italian government, and it was, I think, a couple of days of press spokesman's nightmare trying to deal with the Italian media about how we're asking them to invade Ukraine with us. We weren't. We were just saying, if you want to contribute, this is what you can do. And we did. And they did contribute. The Italians did. But that's just to illustrate what the process normally entails. Is you have a Washington process, and then you have a process of briefing the allies, and that did not happen. It was so much to the point where embassies did not know that we were going to start attacking Iran, and so they had to hustle to try and get people out or get people safe. So so that's I think that's one reason why we don't really know, and there's no sort of coherent message coming out of this administration. Instead of it being kind of a horizontal process, both within Washington and then broader with our allies, it's totally vertical. And you don't know from one hour to the next what he's going to shoot out there. There was a couple of days after it started, he said, our goal is unconditional surrender. And I don't think anybody knew that was the policy that we, it's, and then you have the factor of his family's relationship with the various Gulf states. And I think, for years they have wanted the United States to address this very clear and present danger to them, this, the Iranian regime. Instead of having a lot of people putting in information and expressing concern, you have just this small circle is pushing their own agenda, and the Trump sons, of course, have a very they don't have a real national security agenda necessarily. They do have a big financial agenda with the Gulf states and the contributions from the sovereign wealth funds from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. That's kind of a long answer to. Anything else, Calvin, you want me to address on that?
No.
Oh boy! Well, for my own 401k, I hope it's the Iran war.
I got a question. Containment versus convergence, and what one of the things I got was that it seems lately there's like a convergence in Russian and American
Worldviews.
Worldviews. Okay. But it still seems like there's, if not adversarial, let's say competitive, zero-sum aspects to that, even if they're converged. Like, if you're both playing the basketball game, you're still competing against each other, right? Even though you still are both wanting to play basketball. It's a stupid metaphor, but you get my point.
Not bad.
So, I guess the question is, how much of it is convergence? How much of it is still containment? If you have to assign percentages, maybe, I don't know, because I take a look at, we're still giving aid and money and weapons to Ukraine, which I'm sure Russia doesn't appreciate.
We're not giving them money. Europeans are buying from us arms to be delivered to Ukraine. We have stopped our aid.
Oh, so we have stopped direct monetary aid.
That's not to say that we're not involved there, because we still are.
Right.
Providing
satellite targeting, all
information.
that kind of stuff.
Right.
Signals intelligence, all that.
Yeah, it's not black and white. You're
Right. And then what's interesting is, I'm hearing Trump is desperate. The Strait of Hormuz thing is a big problem, and one of the things that they did was they lifted sanctions from Russia to get the Russian oil flowing into the market, so that we don't see $6, $7, $8 a gallon of gas, that kind of thing. So, to a certain extent, we're accidentally helping them by lifting the sanctions because we're desperate. I was wondering if you could comment on all that, like convergence versus containment, how much of each, is it in a transition phase? It's not totally binary?
It's not totally binary. But it is it's just a remarkable, I don't know, maybe sea change is too strong a word, but going from, telling Kyiv that we're in this with you until you're able to regain your sovereignty and your territory, to basically stepping away from the planning process of trying to defeat Russian aggression in Ukraine. I mean, it was just a real head spinner for the Europeans in particular. But yeah, you're right. There still is a little bit of containment going on. I wonder how much of that is kind of inertia of the Pentagon. I know that I have a lot of friends who were in the Pentagon or still in the Pentagon, and they had a tremendous operation to coordinate with the Europeans about the kind of weapons that had to be delivered, and then the part of it that nobody can talk about publicly is the eyes in the sky and what information we are passing to them. And I believe that's still going on. I think that's probably the most valuable thing we have going on now. And also, we did put more sanctions on Russia to try and kind of, I guess they call them secondary sanctions. If you buy,
People who do business with
like
Russia.
India, South Africa, the BRICS countries. So you can't just say that we've moved completely from containment to, we haven't become a partner with Putin or with Xi Jinping. I mean, obviously not, but.
But is the trend more towards convergence
Yes.
at this point? That's where the direction is going?
Yeah, I think the big question for all of us, depending on how you feel about unilateral use of force and might makes right, etc.
Multipolar.
Yeah, multipolar.
Yeah.
What will happen after 2028? Are we going to continue down this path, or are we going to return to more of a consensus-driven foreign policy and security policy? I also have a lot of European friends, from 33 years of postings in and around Europe, that in 2016, from 2017 to 2021, there was a sense among Europeans that Trump was kind of an aberration. He won the Electoral College, but didn't necessarily win the popular vote. And then they had a little bit of respite, with Biden for 4 years. But 2024 was a real wake-up call for the Europeans in terms of them feeling that maybe the United States we can no longer rely on the United States to come to our aid. And again, it's not all bad about Trump. What he did to get the Europeans to step up and do more was a good thing.
Yeah.
And there were previous presidents who did that too, who told the NATO allies. Obama was big on it, but he would do it, diplomatically and behind closed doors. He wanted to pivot away from Europe more towards East Asia in terms of where we would have our deterrence assets. I forget where I was going with that.
I have a question. There seems to be a belief that the November elections are going to change Congress. If that happens, how will things really change? Will there be change even if we have a different Congress, or is it still going to go on just the way it is?
Well, I think what we have now is a president who really thinks that he is not constrained as he was in the first term. He was constrained, first of all, by his national security leaders at the Pentagon and the NSC and the State Department, and to a great degree by Congress too. I remember I was in Georgia in 2017, and the initial budget request in 2017 was to cut the State Department and USAID by 30%. And hair was combusting all over American embassies over in Europe, and it didn't happen. Congress just said, no, we're not going to do that, and they fully funded the State Department and USAID. Very different this time around. So he basically, I never thought the president could get away with this, but you had a congressionally authorized and appropriated independent federal agency that he basically just erased in USAID. So what you asked, though, what will happen if Congress changes, if the House becomes, well, first of all, the House, I think the House is going to change. I mean, they have a very thin majority. I think it's like 3 seats or something. Yeah. So I think that is going to change. I think the question is the Senate. Is the Senate also going to become Democratic? If both houses are Democratic, it's going to become very difficult for him. What he has going for him is the U.S. Constitution, which is very clear that the president is in charge of foreign policy. Congress also has a role in foreign affairs. They have what's called, advice and consent. That goes to the Senate. The Senate has to provide consent for any senior appointments. But the big thing that they have is the power of the purse. And one interesting thing about this president is he seems to think that he doesn't have to worry too much about Congress's role in budgeting, because he controls both those houses, both the House and the Senate.
Now.
Yeah, but if they go to with a Democratic majority, it's going to be very different. And he is terrified, I think, that he's going to get investigated. All this talk, like what Calvin was talking about, all these gifts that he's gotten from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, that's all going to be investigated. That's the one thing that the majority party sets the agenda for committees and sets the agenda for votes too. It's a big power. It's not like Europe has a parliamentary system, which is very, very different. But the majority, even if it's just 50-50 in the Senate, because the vice president has the vote to break a tie, and that did occur. I think it occurred in the first Trump administration. It was 50-50. So I think it's going to get, if it's possible, even more rancorous if the Democrats win, because they will have much more power to obstruct his agenda.
What I want to ask, how valid do you think the claim that Trump would have prevented the war in Ukraine had he been the president during 2022? And also, why couldn't some like multilateral coordination system like the one you have served, OSCE and other talks, not able to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, it's impossible to know whether or not he would have done it. I think that there is some there is some grounds for that, in the sense that what Russia was really afraid of in Ukraine was a pro-Western government that did not trust Russia for very good reasons. Don't forget that the fighting and the killing started in 2014 and continued right up to 2022. It was much more contained, in a small area in the so-called Donbass. But I know we're on the record here, but you could make the argument. I don't necessarily I'm not going to make that argument necessarily, but you could make the argument that Ukraine was developing more integration with the West, and it wasn't going to get any better. And so his advisors were saying, we should move now, because they are developing a modern, NATO is helping Ukraine develop a modern force. And the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. And it's quite possible that not even probable. If Trump had won in 2020, he would not have supported these training programs and training and equipping programs for Ukraine. So it is possible that they would not have done the full invasion while Trump was president, because Trump was moving away from NATO, and Trump was would not have supported the kind of programs that Biden supported from 2021 to 2022. I would never say that on the record, except in a place like this. But go ahead.
I'd like to get your perspective on what happened with the Maidan revolution in Ukraine, where they ousted a pro-Russian government, and they brought in a pro-Western government. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of misinformation out there where the CIA had something to do with that, and I don't quite believe that, but I do want somebody who is in the know to kind of, give us information about what happened there. Yeah. And if you could give some historical background from 1992 during the Bush administration, how we convinced the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons with security guarantees in our negotiations with Russia at that time.
Well, let's start with that.
Okay.
Just take it chronologically. So I was, so in 92, I was, a fairly junior officer, but I was working in the kind of the information outreach side of things. I was a press officer, and in 1992, the big fear of the first Bush administration was what we called loose nukes. You suddenly had hundreds of officers in the strategic nuclear forces of the Soviet Union who suddenly had no job, or if they had a job, they weren't making much money, and where there was one nuclear power in the USSR, we suddenly had 4. So our policy became that we would tie our assistance and our recognition and everything else that these newly independent states were at the time, or needed at the time, that we would try and convince Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons and to destroy their missiles and all the delivery systems. And so Belarus and Kazakhstan said, yeah, sure, and they knew that they needed the U.S. For support and financial assistance. Ukraine was different. Ukraine had a very historically difficult relationship, or Kyiv had historically fraught relationship with Moscow. And when Yeltsin took over Russia, he made noises about not recognizing the international borders of Ukraine, and specifically Crimea, which was and is, had and still does have, of course, a Russian majority in Crimea. So we started a negotiating process, a 3-way negotiating process, and we put quite a bit of pressure on Kyiv to give up their nuclear weapons. They said, the leader at the time, Leonid Kuchma, said the Rada, their Congress, will not support me signing anything unless there are security guarantees to deter Russia from taking over Crimea and the Donbass, which they did, of course, in 2014. And what happened was we developed, I mean, this is a lot of inside baseball here. This is too boring, let me know.
I'm interested.
So
we need to know this.
yeah, so there was they decided we're going to all sign an agreement, all three countries, plus the UK, because you don't need to know why the UK, but because of the non-proliferation treaty, the UK is the depository state, they call it, so the UK too, so there are four. And the Ukrainians said, so we want the words security guarantees, that we provide security guarantees. And we said, you can't do that. Because it would become a legally binding treaty. And they didn't want that for two reasons. One is they didn't want to go to World War III with Russia over a border dispute in Ukraine. The other reason was, if it had security, if the word guarantees in it, it would require Senate ratification. And the Bush administration thought, we don't have the votes, 2/3 of the Senate to agree to this. So what they did, they came up with this sleight of hand, rhetorical sleight of hand, where they said, we will put the word assurances in there. So we will provide security assurances if the territorial integrity of Ukraine is violated. We will take it to the UN and consult, but behind that word guarantees, that's Article 5 territory. But what happened was,
that's the Budapest Memorandum.
This is the Budapest Memorandum. It's called the Budapest Memorandum because it was signed in, I think, 1996 at a summit meeting in Budapest. We had the word assurances, and we said it's okay if you use the word garantia, or Russian garantia, in your own. And that was, I thought, just a little too slick. And of course...
And what's the nuances of that word?
That sounds like it translates to guarantee.
I know, but
that's what the Russians and Ukrainians said.
Yeah.
That we don't have a word assurances. Our word would be guarantee. But it has a legal, according to the lawyers, it has a legal force that they weren't willing to provide. So that's that. That's the 90s. And then the Maidan, that was fascinating what happened, because what was supposed to happen, again, yeah, go ahead.
What happened to that from 1992 to 2014, before the pro-Russian government took control? What was the situation with Ukraine and Russia and everything, and why, because that's kind of a dark area that I'm trying to fill in.
Yeah. Well, there was another Maidan sit-in in 2005, I think, the so-called Orange Revolution, and that was over a dispute on the election results. So that was the first time Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president, was elected. He wasn't elected. It was, there was fraud in that election. So that was the first one. So then you had, I'm not sure. Well, then you had, they redid the elections. Then you had another pro-Western leader, this guy named Yushchenko, who, by all appearances and evidence was poisoned by Russia when he was still a presidential candidate. So he was the one that was really pushing NATO in 2008 at that summit meeting for Ukraine and Georgia, and that led to the invasion of Georgia. And a lot of people think that they chose Georgia because it was a lot easier than Ukraine, a lot smaller, a lot easier for the Russians to be able to occupy. So, I mean, that was going on, but then you had another election, and Yushchenko lost it, and Yanukovych won. So he won that election. 2010, or I don't know exactly when it was, but so Yanukovych, he developed a policy of neutrality. So it was not part of their constitution that they were going to join NATO as it is now. So he was trying to balance East and West. What triggered the Maidan in 2013 was Yanukovych was set to sign an association agreement with the EU. It was basically a customs agreement, which you'd be interested in.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Probably similar to what Switzerland has.
Yeah, it was it was kind of a free trade agreement, really.
Right.
But it also had a political aspect of it, of further steps towards accession to the EU. And he was supposed to sign in November of 2013. He was summoned to Moscow. He came back, and he said, Yanukovych said, "I have great news. The Russians are going to give us a interest-free loan or a low-cost loan of however $100 million to fill our budget gap, and I am not going to sign the EU association agreement in a couple weeks in Vilnius, which I was supposed to." Well, that led to a huge protest that grew into this several months long occupation of the main square in Kiev called the Maidan. And what happened was the Europeans, not Americans by the way, so this was French, UK, Poland, and Russia too, trying to negotiate an agreement with Yanukovych to have early elections because it was clear to everybody he'd lost his legitimacy by going back against what he said he was going to do, was sign this association agreement with the EU. And so he agreed to this. They agreed to early elections, like 6 months or something. But in the meantime, after some real bloodshed, just a day or two earlier, snipers on the top of buildings killing protesters, Yanukovych lost all of his legitimacy, and he fled the country. Apparently, his security detail just said, "You're on your own, buddy," and left. And he just panicked and left. The Russian narrative is that we organized a coup, and then brought in another pro-Western leader. Of course, the next leader was elected in a free and fair election, so it wasn't like we installed a pro-Western. And also, we weren't involved in those discussions, with Yanukovych.
Yeah. Does the participation of American state officials like Victoria Nuland in the Maidan protests and the subsequent leaked conversation between her and I think it was Ambassador Hyatt, yeah. Where they essentially select I guess he would have been like an interim president, right? Yatsenyuk from...
Yeah, Yatsenyuk, and Poroshenko.
Right, just before Poroshenko. Does that not cast a strong or suspicion over the entire series of events, particularly because I remember watching at the time, the earliest reporting I saw of the BBC was that the sniper fire was coming from the Hotel Kiev, which was of course under protester control, and of course security services and protesters were both shot in the sniper fire that you said, as you correctly pointed out, led to the overthrow of the Yanukovych government. And of course, I recall also that the foreign minister of Estonia was basically intimating in another leaked conversation that the sniper attack was basically probably coming from the same group of individuals. So, I don't know.
I haven't heard that about the snipers. I haven't heard that.
So I can just tell you, it's from a leaked conversation between Ermias Pates and Baroness Catherine Ashton, who was, I think, in some diplomatic position within the European Union at the time, who also herself participated in the protests.
Yeah, I have not seen that report. So I was an ambassador at that time. I was in was I an ambassador at that time? Actually, I wasn't an ambassador. 2015. Yeah, no, I'm 2015. Anyway, my boss was Toria Nuland.
Oh, okay.
And I also worked for her at NATO. So, I mean, you could claim I don't have a real objective view.
I would claim that, but
I love Toria Nuland. I will say about Toria Nuland is this was a real come to Jesus moment for her. That leaked conversation. She did that on a cell phone, and Jeff Pyatt also had a cell phone, and they were doing something that Foreign Service officers do. They do things like, hey, so who do you think would be the next really best president? I mean, this is the kind of thing I've had this conversation with. Netanyahu is a pain in the ass. So but you don't do it on a cell phone.
Sure.
And that's basically what happened. And Toria was thrilled about the Maidan. And she had, before that leaked conversation, I don't think she dared do it afterwards. Cameras followed her down to the Maidan, and she was handing out sandwiches.
Cookies was what I remember.
She said it was sandwiches. It had a little more protein, I guess. But, and that was unfortunate, too. Keep in mind, who was the president at this time?
I was Barack Obama.
Barack Obama had a very transactional approach to working with Russia. The reason why they had that whole reset was he had an agenda that he thought required not provoking Russia. And that agenda was the Syria, Iran, the Iran nuclear deal. And also the renewal of the strategic arms reduction, the New START. So it doesn't ring true to me that he would actually authorize the CIA or whatever to start shooting people.
Well,
it just doesn't make sense to me.
The counterpoint to that would be that disruptions in Eastern Europe would cause Russia to pull back from their support for the Syrian state, which they have intervened on behalf of, in a way that neither Russia nor the Chinese had with regards to Libya. They both took a backseat to, the trouble in Libya and that government subsequently overthrown.
Yeah.
And my understanding is Russia has more of a stake, or had more of a stake in Syria due to the existence of like a warm water naval port.
Yeah. It's their only,
And of course, obviously, their credibility as well. Because what good is being an ally of Russia if they never come to your defense?
Right. Yeah, I think, I thought probably the stupidest thing that Obama did vis-a-vis Russia was to call Russia merely a regional power, that it can't project power beyond its borders, and it's nothing more than a big gas station for them. That really offended Putin, and I think that if you talk about what contributed to that decision to send the Russian Air Force to Syria, I think it was this to Obama. You say we're just a regional power. Well, look, we're going way beyond our borders here. And it was a response to Libya. He was furious about that. The thing with Libya was the U.S., the U.K., and France, and it might have been a consensus NATO decision, decided that they wanted to provide air cover to prevent massacres by Gaddafi in Libya. And normally, so they went to the UN Security Council to get a resolution that civilian lives would be protected. And the president at the time was Dmitry Medvedev. And he gave the order to abstain. Don't vote yes, don't vote no, don't veto. And it infuriated Putin. And so I think, as Georgia was a response to the arrogance of NATO, saying that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO, I think this is a response to Obama calling Putin whatever, weak state. But yeah, like I say, I love Toria, but she made a couple big mistakes.
Well, it's interesting that you said before that Trump might not have taken the hostile stance he took with regards to Russia, back during if he was still in charge in
2022, yeah.
What was Victoria Nuland's position in the Trump administration? Was she completely gone? Was
she was gone.
Absent?
She resigned. She resigned in January 2021.
Okay. Wait, no. Was she still in the State Department?
No.
Through the Trump administration? No.
No.
She left
I was for about a year and a half.
Okay. Because I do know that her extended family. Are you familiar with Fred? Have you met Fred Kagan?
No, I know Robert Kagan. I know Fred Kagan.
So my understanding is a lot of the war planning for the Ukraine war on the American side came through her. Well, the Institute for the Study of War, which was headed up by, I can't remember Fred's wife's name.
There's no Kagan there.
Yeah, it's not. She's got a different name than that, but yeah, it is a Kagan.
Yeah, I'm sure there was quite a bit of cross-pollination between the Pentagon and between and the Institute for the Study of War. Quite possible. Eric, is it okay if we go back to? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, where do you see the Russia-Ukraine conflict going? How does it get resolved? Where does America stand after that happens? How's that shaping up?
Yeah. I think Putin's calculation here is that he does have the cards, and he is, I think, quite thrilled that we're not providing multi-billion-dollar packages of arms to Ukraine I think that the only way to really get him to negotiate would be to try and change that calculation that he can win on the battlefield. But I think that the possibility of that is very, very slim under this administration. And the way to get him to change that calculation is to support Ukraine militarily, to continue doing what we did with the previous administration and providing the kind of weapons they need to interrupt Putin's supply lines, and that was something that Biden wasn't really willing to do either, to try and hit the supply lines and depots, because he didn't want our weapons being used against the territory of Russia. But I don't have a real crystal ball on how it's going to end. I think it is a war of attrition. And I think we are seeing an erosion of support for prosecuting the war in Ukraine.
Erosion where, like?
Public support.
Like American public support?
No, I'm talking about Ukrainian support.
Ukrainian support.
I think there's still a majority of people who say we should stay in the fight, but it's been a real grind for the Ukrainians. Their economy is collapsed. In the winter they suffer in the cold, and they're not suffering the kind of casualties that Russia is, but they're still suffering quite a few casualties, and I think there's a lot of fatigue on the front lines in Ukraine.
Haven't they been conscripting people outside the normal fighting age to sort of make up for?
Well, that's something that a lot of American supporters have a hard time with. I think the conscription starts, I think, at age 25. I mean, normally you would start at a much earlier age. I mean, we started at 18 when we had it, and they just don't have enough people to do a kind of a proper rotation on the front line. So you have soldiers who are on the front line much longer than they should be because they don't have the replacements.
But one thing about Ukraine...
Hang on, because it's freezing.